Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 3 of our book on Mary Kay's People Management. Today, we are going to go over chapters 4, 5, and 6. And I'd love input. So, if you are actually seeing this live, feel free to unmute and put in your 2 cents and make a comment if you'd like. So, the first chapter is called Praise People to Success. And I always read Mary Kay's quote on the left. It says, "Everyone wants to be appreciated. So, if you appreciate someone, don't keep it a secret." Um, and I think that's so important, especially if you go into a store nowadays and you get good customer service. I always ask, I said, could I speak to your boss? Because usually when people ask to speak to the boss, it's usually because something's gone wrong or they want to complain. But I always make a really big deal if I get good customer service, especially like when you call a customer service hotline and you can actually talk to a human. So anyway, so Mary Kay talks about praising people to success. She says, for most women, the last bit of applause they received was when they graduated from high school. So she feels that little successes pave the way to bigger successes. And giving praise is part of Mary Kay's marketing philosophy. She talked once, Mary Kay herself talked about how a new beauty consultant is told what she did right, even though her reaction is usually, well, what did I do wrong? So in this case, she would encourage the new team member to do the party just with the support of the director. Now I know often we just do the whole party for the consultant so they learn, but I'm beginning to rethink that and think maybe we should be really letting them do more. And Mary Kay said that even if a brand new beauty consultant totally flubs the whole party, like literally it doesn't go well. She's always going, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And instead say, well, let's talk about what you did right first. You greeted the hostess, you brought your trays and mirrors. Like there are things that she did correct, right? People will ask you for criticism, but they really only want praise. Only after the beauty consultant had been praised for her strong points will the director then be able to offer her, I don't want to say the word criticism, but feedback and that kind of stuff. So this is very interesting. Mary Kay shared this story. Years ago, she goes, I knew instinctively that Helen McVoy, which was one of Mary Kay's original 8 team members, was going to be a tremendous success in our business. I once overheard her talking outside my office and saying to a woman, you had a $35 show. Wow, that's wonderful, she said enthusiastically. Now, even then, a $35 show was not so good. I couldn't imagine who she was talking to, so I stepped outside my office to see. Mary Kay, Helen said effusively when she saw me. May I present you my new team member? Last night she had a $35 class. Helen paused for a moment, then lowered her voice. At her first 2 shows, she didn't sell anything, but last night she sold $35. Isn't that terrific? Immediately, I realized that without Helen's praise and encouragement, her new team member might have never stayed long enough to do a 4th class. But Helen praising her to success was the kind of praise that does wonders to build a person's confidence. By receiving praise for each small achievement, the individual gains to success. Though little successes pave the way to bigger successes. So, you guys think about an instance. Maybe you had a corporate job, or maybe you were just in a situation where things weren't going according to plan. Maybe you were a substitute teacher. Maybe you were a brand new nurse, and it's like patient to patient in the beginning, nothing went well. You couldn't get the IV in, or you couldn't do whatever, right? And then all of a sudden, you did something well that somebody acknowledged, and it just made you feel like I can do this, right? Because we all get no's, we all have zero appointments. So Mary Kay goes on to say, I believe that in order to be a good leader, you must understand the value of praising people to success. So jot that down. I'm on page 29. So Mary Kay went on to say, praise is inevitable. Excuse me. Praise is an incredible, effective motivator. Unfortunately, many managers are reluctant to employ it. Yet but I can't help feeling that they may know how much praise means, not only to others, but also to themselves. When was the last time you said to somebody at work, you're really terrific. I admire that fine job you're doing here at the office. Of course, we don't really talk like that. But anyway, Mary Kay probably did back in the day. So it's also interesting because she talked about how, in keeping with the philosophy of recognition, she used to say a 40-cent gift with $100 worth of praise, or that note. It could be literally like a 50-cent ribbon, but with a note that made them feel like $1,000,000. The ribbon had such incredible value. She said the worth of the recognition is 1,000 times more effective than a $100 gift given with 40 cents of recognition. So she talked about the power of positive motivation in a goal-oriented structure. So this is interesting. She talks about how She awards pink Cadillacs. She does the trips. A diamond bumblebee is the ultimate symbol of recognition. It's the crown jewel. It's recognized. The recipient is recognized for being the queen, like the big. I don't remember. I have one of them up here on my shoulder. But it's interesting how applause is a powerful form of praise. Now, I know when I came into Mary Kay and everybody was clapping and everything, I was like, what is with these people? Because I didn't get it. But, because at seminar, they do a lot of that. But what's interesting is when people were at our seminar in Dallas, newspaper and magazine reporters have described the event as the quote, ultimate form of praise. And of course, that's exactly what they intended it to be. Applause is a powerful form of praise, right? And those who did get an opportunity to perform in front of a live audience must repeat the same night after night after night. So if you've ever gone to seminar and you see these dancers and all the recognition, they do at night, and then a couple of days later they do it again and again and again. But you start thinking about all the people that are in Hollywood, all the performers, all of those, and you think about how is it that they can just literally, like a play, like out on Broadway, they do the same show over and over again, but it's the live audience, that interaction with the audience, their gasp, their shout outs, their applause is literally what keeps the actors and actresses going. So Mary Kay talks about giving as much recognition as possible. Now you don't want it to sound like it's insincere or that you give that same recognition to everybody. Like, my daughter and I were talking just the other day because she's in her early 30s and mid 30s, and we were talking about how her generation, everybody got a participation trophy. And now they've kind of swung back and say, no, kids need to learn that they're not always going to win. Like they have to understand that there is the winning team and then there's the other team that didn't win, but they gave it their all, right? So we were both talking about that kind of thing. And actually, Laura, we're going to talk about sandwiching praise in just a minute between two layers of criticism, or two layers, excuse me, two layers of praise between with one layer of criticism. All right, so we're going to go back to recognition. Give as much recognition as possible. She says, but we do attempt to have many people appear on stage, if only for a few minutes, as a reward for their achievement. How important are these brief stage appearances? Mary Kay said, well, frankly, I think it means more for a woman to be recognized by her peers on stage than to receive an expensive present in the mail. Okay. She says she was recently asked, now this is a really interesting story. She says recently she was asked to speak at a top manufacturer's convention. She was invited to an awards dinner, and several of the dealers were wearing navy blue sport jackets. Mary Kay says she couldn't help noticing how poorly they fit. Evidently, they hadn't been properly tailored. Why are those men wearing those jackets? She asked a company executive. Oh, those are our top dealers, she was told. Throughout the entire banquet, I kept waiting for a speech that would honor those top performers. I thought it was going to be a highlight of the affair. Well, after the dinner, there was entertainment by a well known artist, and then balloons were dropped from the ceiling. That's a great way to start the recognition part of the banquet, she thought to herself. But that was it. The affair then was over, and everyone started to leave. So Mary Kay says, well, what about the awards to the executive? He goes, oh, they already received their awards. The Navy jackets, we sent them to their hotel rooms. So Mary Kay says, these are in her words, quote, I was astonished. I couldn't imagine that a company would have sponsored an awards dinner without publicly recognizing its star performers. At Mary Kay, we never miss an opportunity to give recognition. I'm sure it would have meant far more to those men to have stood up and been applauded than to have received those navy blue jackets. And so it's just really interesting because you think about that. Do you ever have that opportunity at what you do, at your job or whatever? Everyone likes to see his or her name in print. They talk about four elements in a successful publication is recognition, information, education, and inspiration. But their number one purpose is recognition. So think about that when you're writing somebody a personal note or your newsletter or whatever. You want to include recognition, information, education, and inspiration. And she goes on to talk about how sometimes that doesn't work with men. She said, did you ever notice the stars on a 6'7" 275-pound linebacker's helmet? Well, men are willing to risk boldly injuring for praise and recognition. So don't think that men don't like recognition. They do. Um, anyway, so that's a great chapter. The next chapter is called The Art of Listening. And Mary Kay says in her quote, tenacity and perseverance are essential qualities for success in business, but there's much more to being successful. Real strength entails being considerate and supportive of people's feelings. So it's really interesting because she talked about, you all heard the quote before where, God gave you one mouth and two ears, so therefore you need to listen twice as much as you speak. So she talked about don't undervalue the ability to listen. And she talked about how there was this salesperson who everybody would go to, excuse me, there was a supervisor, a supervisor that was hired who knew nothing about the industry. I don't know if he moved up, and he obviously didn't move up in the ranks, but he was a well-known manager, but he really didn't know anything, but he knew how to listen. And when people would come to him, he'd always say, well, what do you think you should do? They'd come up with their own solution. He'd agree, and they'd leave very satisfied. They thought he was the best manager they'd ever had. So, with that said, Mary Kay says, I solved most of the problems by just listening and letting the involved party do the talking. If I listen long enough, the person will generally come up with an adequate solution. And so, which I think is absolutely true. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure I open the chat here so I can be reading comments. Or if you guys have a comment or want to throw something out, just let me know. Listening is an art, and the first tenet of the skill is paying undivided attention to the other party. She says, literally, she could walk into a crowded room and she does everything she can to shut out everything else. She said, I think if a gorilla walked in the room and I was really, really focused, I wouldn't take my eyes off that person. And I remember when Mary Kay shares that story about she stood in line for, I think it was 3 hours to meet the president of the company. And as he shook her hand and said, nice to meet you, he wasn't even looking at her. He looked over her shoulder to see how long the line was. That was in an earlier chapter. She said, people can be distracted by their own petty prejudices. For example, a person may use profanity or some expression that you don't like, or perhaps they're irritated by an accent. She said, I know Southerners who can't stand a New York accent and vice versa. So at some point, each of us has failed to listen by relentlessly awaiting our turn to speak. Have you ever been in a conversation, especially in a big group, where someone's like, "Oh, you should hear what my mom did," and someone goes like, while you're sharing what your mom did, the every person's going, "Well, wait till you hear what my mom did." It's almost like everyone's trying to one up each other instead of really being present and hearing what that mom did, and then kind of letting that soak in. And so we're all guilty of that. We all do that. Sometimes listening by itself may not be enough. Some people must be prodded if they are to find out what they're thinking. But a word of caution, be subtle or you're going to come across as being intrusive. Sometimes there's a fine line between privacy from concern and interest. And so we just have to, as directors, a lot of people come to us and want our feedback or our advice. And I never claim to be a marriage counselor. I never want to ever give anybody marital advice or personal advice about raising children. I mean, if they say, well, what did you do to get your kids to go to bed on time? I can share what I did. Um, but sometimes, there's that fine line where, um, like Mary Kay gives a story here about a gentleman who was with her for 12 years. He was an executive at the company and he was always on time, always did his part. And all of a sudden, within a month or two, things just like he wasn't coming in on time, he wasn't turning in reports on time. And he came into Mary Kay's office and she also talked about not being behind her desk because that gave her this authoritative feeling. But she says, I'd love to offer you some coffee. Would you like how do you like your coffee? He said, black would be fine. So she came around the front of her desk and sat down. And she said, Bill, that's just what she's calling him in the story. You're one of our key people. You've been with us 12 years, and I feel we've become good friends in that time. And he says, Mary Kay, I feel that way too. Then she said, well, I'm concerned about you, Bill. So this is where she's trying to figure out what's going on, but doesn't want to pry kind of thing. She says, you've been so conscientious about your work. So there's a praise, right? That you haven't, but lately you just haven't been yourself. So she didn't say, you've been late to this and late to that. She just said, you just haven't seemed yourself. He didn't respond. So Mary Kay says, I stopped talking and took a sip of my coffee. He seemed tense and I offered to pour more. Would you like more? No, that's okay, he said. Then she said one more, she asked again, is something wrong at home? His face grew red and after a few moments, he nodded his head. Is there anything I can do to help? He proceeded to tell me how upset he was because his wife's doctor discovered a tumor on her upper back. So he goes on to explain that. And so what ended up happening, she goes, I don't think a manager can work with a person day in and day out and not develop some sort of personal relationship. Of course, you must use discretion at all times and never pry. But she basically asked if there's anything she could do. He said no. He talked to her for a little bit and he seemed to feel much better. And from that day moving forward, it wasn't a problem. He wasn't late. He just needed, I guess, to get that off his chest, right? Mary Kay also talks about encouraging feedback. I'm gonna have to go quick here because I'm running a little bit out of time, but encouraging feedback, there's three rules to encouraging feedback. Now, this is super important. I don't care if you're a principal of a school or if you've got nurses that report to you, or if you're Mary Kay and you've got a team, okay? Sometimes some of those team members are family, which I will tell you right now, working with family is a whole different thing. It's very important to encourage people to give you feedback. Abide by these three rules. Number one, listen to what they say. Listen to what they say. Number two, acknowledge all correspondence sent to you. They might have sent you an email, a note, whatever. Acknowledge all of it. Number three, give proper recognition for all valid suggestions. So if someone says, well, I really wish we could do this at the meeting, and whatever it is, you want to give it proper recognition for all valid suggestions. Mary Kay talks about our product development is different from that of any other cosmetic company. Typically, a big cosmetic company will come out with a new product. They will say to their sales force, here it is, here's the new color. It's called Sassy Cherry. It's $12, go sell it. And they'll do all this ad campaign and blah, blah, blah. And we do our company does the exact opposite. Our customers want that lip brush to do this and that. Or our sales staff will say, um, our customers want this shade. Well, by us listening to what consumers want, our research and development groups introduce products that are consumer driven, which is very unusual in the industry. And then Mary Kay ends this chapter by saying, I believe that failing to hear what your people are saying indicates gross negligence in a manager. I'll say that again. I believe that failing to hear what your people are saying indicates gross negligence in a manager. Fortunately, once you are aware of the importance of listening, it's not a difficult art to practice. Your people will let you know what's happening if they know they can count on you to listen. Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes, but chapter 6 is easy. It's called Sandwich Every Bit of Criticism Between Two Heavy Layers of Praise. And Mary Kay talks about how there are times when a manager must communicate dissatisfaction, but the criticism should be directed at what's wrong, not at who's wrong. I'm going to say that again. Focusing on what's wrong, not who's wrong. Like, oh, you guys, I don't think our unit's selling enough foundations. I don't think our unit's selling enough skincare. What could we do as a group to make skincare sales thrive? What could we do? You know what I'm saying? Like, you just put it out there. When someone, she says, Mary Kay enters her office, she gets out from behind her desk because she feels like the desk represents authority. I already mentioned that to you. There's a heading here. It's called Be Tender and Tough. So she said at the same time, managers must be strong and speak straightforwardly. If someone's work is unsatisfactory, you can't skirt the issue. You must communicate your feelings. This calls for being simultaneously tender and tough, but you've got to maintain your manager's role, but most importantly, have empathy. And it's interesting because when I went, gosh, it was right after COVID, and I started doing in-person things. I think the first two in-person parties I did, I maybe sold maybe 10 or $12 at each one. I mean, I consider that a disaster. And yet I thought, you know what, Diane, you're rusty from doing things in person. And you know what? Sometimes you just need to put yourself out there. But I kind of had a aha of what it's like when things don't go the way you want them to. Because pretty much I can always sell between $300 and $500 at a facial or a class. I mean, like almost like clockwork. But I almost think that was God's way of saying, okay, remember what it's like to sell nothing at a skincare class or a facial, right? So just kind of puts it all into perspective. Never give criticism without praise. She said it's a struggle. She said that's a strict rule for her. No matter what you're criticizing, you must find something good to say both before and after. Criticize the act, not the person. And she said, I've seen some managers operate on the theory that when they're angry about something, they should criticize the person and let them know exactly how they feel about their actions. The school of thought proposes that you should express your emotions, let your other person have it, no punches pulled. After the manager had sufficient time to vent his anger, he's supposed to end it with a word of praise, and theoretically everything will be okay. Well, if you've been ridiculed or picked on or criticized in a rant and then you give an ounce of praise, that praise is absolutely not going to have any impact because you kind of feel like it's maybe them just backpedaling or trying to be nice once they've thrown you under a bus. So Mary Kay says, this is interesting. She goes, I believe we all have fragile egos and that we respond much better to praise than to criticism. A woman, for instance, might buy a new dress that she falls in love with. So she gives this example. She said, I thought this dress that I bought was beautiful. I was pleased at how good I looked in it. And my daughter, Marilyn, had a different opinion. Mother, you're not going to wear that dress, are you? Well, why, yes, I replied, and somewhat taken back by her comment. But mother, you look like a cow in it, she told me. I don't have to tell you that I took the dress off. Not only did I not wear it that night, I never wore it again. So she said, now had she said, gee, mom, you look really beautiful in blue. It brings out the color of your eyes. Don't you have anything in blue? She said, I would have had a totally different experience, and I would probably have worn a blue dress that night or the next day. She also talked about how by and large, this is interesting, women in Mary Kay's day lived more sheltered lives as young people and did not have to face the harsh criticism to which young boys were often subjected. For this reason, I've always advised handling criticism with a very gentle touch. She said, never give criticism in front of others. It's self-defeating to criticize someone in front of others. And then she goes on to say, rather than publicly attacking the foreman, the manager should have privately discussed the issue. So this was in a scenario where this person literally, the head boss came down and ridiculed the foreman in front of their entire staff. And I actually had one of my consultants call me about a month ago and had this exact same scenario. I checked in with her and she answered, and I could tell it sounded like she'd been crying. I go, are you okay? And she goes, no, I just had the worst experience at my job of my life. And I said, do you feel like you need to share? And she says, I got ridiculed in front of all my peers by my boss, like yelled at. And then my boss went in his office and slammed the door. And she said, I will never respect him for the rest of my career. I'm gonna give him my notice. So Mary Kay goes, she knew perfectly well. And so she says, so Mary Kay asked, she went to go do a skincare thing, a whole presentation, and this consultant let her use her starter kit, and it was a disaster. It was filthy dirty. And so Mary Kay thought, oh my gosh. So she decided to structure a class called Cleanliness is Next to Godliness, which I thought was very cute. And Mary Kay decided that she was going to do the message to the whole group. So this woman didn't feel like Mary Kay was picking on her, like your kit is sanitarily a disaster, right? And so throughout the meeting, she spoke about how important it is to be an independent beauty consultant, to be professionalism in your dress. Do you look like an independent beauty consultant, right? Do you have your makeup on from the neck up? Do you look sharp and professional in a skirt or a dress, whatever? And she says that she knew perfectly well that she was guilty and she must have been thinking, my kit's a mess. Have you ever listened to a Sunday sermon in church and been positive that the minister was aiming the message directly at you? How did he know? You would say to yourself. At that same time, you would think, no, it can't be. The minister's point got through to you perfectly, but without causing any embarrassment. A good people manager will never put someone down. So it says, and that your job is to play the role of a problem solver, and that by taking that approach instead of criticizing, you'll accomplish considerably more. So I loved all of those chapters between the listening, the sandwiching criticism between two layers of praise, and then praising people to success. It just, those are all just really, really key things. Next week, we'll be doing be a follow through person, which is chapter 8. Then we're going to go straight into Enthusiasm Moves Mountains, which is one of my favorite chapters. And then the speed of the leaders, the speed of the gang. So we'll be doing 3 chapters next week. And at this point, I'm going to thank you for jumping in tonight and being a part of this.